Okay, good morning. So we are doing today, above the bed, at least an attempt to finish up on the Mishnah. We just to review quickly what we did yesterday. We started the Mishnah here in the fourth parak. B'shleisha parakim Mishana, Hanim Nesin Eskapen Abra Pa'am Bayim. There were 3 times during the year, 3 parakim during the year, where the Kahanim would be duchening 4 times a day. What are the 4 times a day that the Kahanim can be duchening? Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, V'Ne'ilas Hasharim. The 4 times a day were Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah. So we're saying that there are 3 prakim, 3 times where the Kahanim duchen 4 times a day. And those 4 times are Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah. What are those prakim? B'tainiyos, B'ma'amadais, U'b'yom HaKippurim. On the tainus, the ma'amadais, and on Yom Kippur. So again, the Taanit we have discussed, those are the situations where there would be a fast that was instituted because of the lack of rain. So on those Taanit, they would add in additional tefillas, including Ne'ilah. So over there, they would be duchening not just at Shachris, but also at Ne'ilah. There were times that they would duchen even at Mincha. And so we understand what the Taanit, that will be the fast that we've mentioned, the public fast that we instituted. And Yom Kippur, we understand as well, where the Kahanim are duchening by every tefillah. So we see that as well by the Taanit of Yom Kippur, that they will be duchening by Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. That we understand as well. The question is, what about this Ma'amades? What are these Ma'amades? So Ma'amades, again, as I mentioned yesterday, are the groups of Kahanim, Levim, Israel that were set up together with the Mishmares, right? Remember that there were 24 Mishmares that were set up by Shmuel, David, Levim, Rishainim. When they came back from Eretz Yisrael the second Mr. Mikdash, not all the Kahanim came back, or many did not. So they set up again 24 Mishmares, but again, they were from different families. And along with those 24 Mishmares, they set up Ma'amades. Ma'amades were groups of Kahanim, Levim, Israelim that would, in the case of the Yisraelim, if they lived in Yerushalayim, they would go to the Beis HaMikdash. But if they lived far away, they would stay in their towns. And their job of these Ma'amades was to sort of be around. They would help out in various ways in the Beis HaMikdash, but they weren't doing the service. They weren't necessarily even in the Beis HaMikdash. They could be in their local town, but they had a certain job. What was the job? Elohim Ma'amades. Well, these are the Ma'amades. Why do you have Ma'amades? What is the Ma'amades there to do? Because the Pasuk says in last week's parsha that Hashem is commanding the Jewish people to bring the carbon tamid, but the carbon tamid is a public carbon, meaning it's coming from everybody. What do you mean it's carbon? Where is or how is the Jewish people bringing a carbon tamid? They're not there. How is it possible to bring a carbon and be yetzi the people when the people aren't there? Remember, as we said, that there were 24 mishmaris. So on those mishmaris, there was a maimed in Yerushalayim, Mishal Kayanim, Mishal Levim, Mishal Yisraelim. And in that maimed was representatives of the entirety of the Jewish people, including Kahanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, who were there in Yerushalayim to be the representatives, as it were, of the Jewish people, and in that way be able to immerse the Jewish people in this daily carbon that they were required to do. So Higaz Man HaMishmar Lalis, when it became time for X Mishmar, one of the 24 Mishmars, to go up. So Kahanim, Levim, Eilim, Yerushalayim, the Kahanim and the Levim who were part of that Maimed. In other words, obviously, these weren't Kahanim who had to go up for that Mishmar. These were part of just random Kahanim. Who were part of a specific Maimed that was attached to a Mishmar, so they would also go to Yerushalayim. The Israel Sheba Esa Mishmar, Wisconsin, Loran, the Kerb Maisa Brachus. And the Israelim who were part of that Mishmar and were not in Yerushalayim, meaning they lived wherever they lived, so they would go to their shuls and they would read their Maisa Brachus, as we're going to explain in a minute. But if the Israelim were part of that Maimed, were in Yerushalayim or nearby, so they would go also to Yerushalayim. It's not only a limit on Kahanim and Levim that only they were part of the Maimed, they went to Yerushalayim. Even Yisraelim could go to Yerushalayim so long as it was reasonable for them to go. they could go as well. And, and huh? Why would they go to be part of the Maimed, to be part of that Mishmar, to help represent? No, the Maimed is Kohanim, Levim, and Israelim. It's everybody. Kohanim, Levim, Israelim. They're all part of the Maimed. And every Mishmar had a Maimed that was attached to it. The Maimed was Kohanim, Levim, Israelim. They would go to the Beis Hamikdash if they were local. In the case of the Israelim, Kohanim, Levim had to go. In the case of the Israelim, they would go if they were local. And if they weren't local, they would go to their shul. Now, I have a little bit of an issue with the Rashi over here. So let's explain. So the Mishnah is telling us that there are three prakim. 4 times a day they would duchen, and this was now discussing the Anshe Maimed. Now, tanias of rain take place when there's a drought. I can understand why we call that a parak. It happens once in a while. Makes sense to me. Yom Kippur happens once a year. I understand how that's a parak. The Anshe Maimed is not taking place at a few times during the year. The Anshe Maimed take place the whole year. Maybe it does place on Yantif or whatever. I don't know exactly, how that worked when everybody's there. If all the if there was a specific Maimed for those days, because remember on those Yom Tovim, all the Mishmars had to work. It wasn't the specific Mishmar. On Yantif, all the Mishmars had to work. Everybody was there. So I don't know exactly how it worked on Yantif. But put that on the side, aside from Yantif. What is the Maimed aspect? What is the Perik aspect of the Anshe Maimed? If the Anshe Maimed are taking place every single day, then how do you call that a Perik? Look at Rashi. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, I'll call Mishmar. It's about 15 lines down. I'll call Mishmar. Rashi says, Arba ve'eser Mishmar. So there was 24 Mishmaris. Shmuel David Tiknum. And Shmuel and David had made that takana of the Mishmaris. I'll call Mishmar a Maimed Yerushalayim. On every Mishmar there was a Maimed in Yerushalayim. As we've explained, right? Kavua and Va'emdim Be'er, they would be Kavua and taking place in their cities, wherever they were. Some of them would be in Yerushalayim. And they would stand up on the carbon of their brothers, Levad Elu Hadarim Yerushalayim, and aside from those that actually lived in Yerushalayim, Hayim Ma'amadas B'chol Yeshei Yisrael Nechak L'Chap Dal Ma'amadas. And aside from those that actually lived in Yerushalayim or were close by, there were Ma'amadas in every single city. Why? Because the Jewish people were divided into 24 Ma'amadas, connected Arba Mishmaris, right? Parallel to the 24 Mishmaris. So what does Rashi say? Ulevad Elu Hadarim Yerushalayim, and aside from those that lived in Jerusalem, right, and I'm adding who were close enough to be able to travel. Hayu Ma'amadas B'chol Ir. There was a Maimed in every city. Why? Because Yisrael was not Chavdal Ma'amadas connected to Arba Mishmaris. So now I don't understand. If there were Ma'amadas in every city connected to the 24 Mishmaris, then what does that mean? For all practical intents and purposes, doesn't sound like there's a Maimed in every city, every week, every one of the 48 weeks. No, isn't there going to be a Maimed then? So how do you view that as a parak? Right, it's mashma b'shloisha prakim. Right, what do we say in the beginning in Rosh Hashanah? Right, ba'arba prakim ha'olam nidain. Right, it's not every day. What is the arba prakim ha'olam nidain? Right, it's the Tu B'Shvat. Right, it's Shavuos, it's B'chag, Den Alamayim, and Rosh Hashanah. Those are the 4 times a year. It's a parak. It's not something that's so common. So I don't understand Rashi's lashon here about b'chol ir. But if you look at Rabbeinu Gershom here says that what does it mean with Taanit of Ma'amados? He says V'adei Ma'amados heim b'chol yom. Right? He's bothered. What do you mean with Shloisha Prakim? He says the Taanit of Ma'amados says V'adei Ma'amados heim b'chol yom. The Ma'amados for every single day. Elakach choshev parak. So then why would you consider it a parak? It's not a parak. It's every day. It's called a parak. Because not all of Klal Yisrael are part of the Anshe Maimed. Who's a part of the Anshe Maimed? Who are the representatives of the Jewish people that are going to be a part of the Maimed? There's going to be a few people. Let's say they have 100 people. Okay, so they have 100 people. Is that going to cover every single town? Absolutely not. It's going to cover certain towns. It's going to cover certain cities. It's not going to be everywhere. Says Rabbeinu Gershom, that's why it's considered a parak b'fnei atzmai. Like Israel, it's not all the Jews. Ela Shalaisa Mishmar, only from that specific Mishmar. With Taanit, Yesh Kol Yisrael, but by the Taanit, of course, you have all the Jewish people. So I think that's what he's trying to say. And then he goes a little bit confusing. V'yesh men dal prakim yom. They had 4 times during the day. Okay, 4 times during the day. I'm not sure that was the mission that we have. It is b'shloisha prakim is only going on the times when you do it, not on the times of the day. It doesn't say ba'arba prakim. Huh? From the point of view of the person, I don't know. The Mishnah, I don't see where it says prakim on these four. But in any event, but the first part of Rabbeinu Gershom seems to be saying is that we can call these a situation of prakim. Why? Because of the fact that it's not all of Klal Yisrael. It's l'cha kach chashav perak b'fnei atzim deloy kol Yisrael, and it's a person here, a person there, and so therefore it's going to be relatively rare to have a situation where you're going to have somebody who's from the Anshe Maimed in the shul. It's going to be, this person this week, another person another week, but it's not necessarily going to be that you're going to have in every single city, every single day, people doing this. Otherwise, how would you consider it a situation of a parak? Like that, it's a relatively rare thing. All right. Continues the Mishnah. So what did these people who are part of the Anshe Maimed, so what did they actually do? What was their job? Says the Mishnah, the Anshe Maimed Mis'anan Arba Yom B'Shavua. They would fast 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yom Beis Ad Yom Chamishi. Lo Hay Mis'anan Erev Shabbos M'Nekvar Shabbos. They didn't fast on Friday because it was Erev Shabbos, covered Shabbos, so not to come into Shabbos on fasting. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean like it's a mitzvah to do ta'ameh, and times two. It just means that you shouldn't come into Shabbos feeling bad, right? Feeling terrible, right? That's the idea. But you're absolutely not supposed to be eating on Friday to the kind of extent that you will not be hungry on Shabbos. Absolutely not. It just means they shouldn't be coming to Shabbos famished in such a manner that your mom, ice mensch. Yeah, and why didn't they fast on Sunday? You shouldn't go from menucha and eineg into yigia and tainus via musu, right? That would make a person die, collapse, etc. So the Bartanur writes that for one of two reasons: either because of the fact that you have a double neshama on Shabbos, and that's going to all of a sudden not go into a tainus. It's like a shock as you lose in the neshama. Now you're fasting, and who knows what it could do. And the other sort of side is just simple, like without necessarily bringing the spiritual world, just push it that you're going to be in a situation where you're not eating and drinking and sort of having a good old time, and all of a sudden you have to go cold turkey and shut it down. That would be a bit of a shock to anybody. Okay, either way. So what do they do at these ma'amados? So in the shul, during the whole week, except for Shabbos, meaning Monday through Friday, they would have a special laning. And again, this again points out the point, like if they were having a special laning with the Sefer Torah, as we're going to see, it would be very difficult to understand this as B'shloisha Prakim B'shana. One of them is Ma'amados, and you have somebody in every single shul. You have people from that Maimed. It would be like you never have regular laning. You would be totally collapsed by the Anshe Ma'amados. So that's what I mean. It has to be a parak, like Rabbeinu Gershom says, that it wasn't in every shul, it wasn't in every place. It was okay. You have a person part of the Maimed. He's in that shul. That's where they did it. But it wasn't everywhere. Yeah. So what do they do? Whoever was part of that Maimed, what would they do during their week? So they're fasting 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they have a special laning 5 days a week. Right? You would know which shul to avoid. Right? You're going to go to the shul where they have laning on Sunday? No way. Right? So, Bayam Marisha and Bereshis V'Yirakia, they used to lay in different parts of Bereshis. Bayam Marisha and Bereshis V'Yirakia, B'Sheni Hirakia B'Kava Mayim, B'Shlishi Kava Mayim Yim La'Iris, B'Revi Yimaris V'Rishis Tzua Mayim, B'Chamishi Tzua Mayim B'Tetzi Arts, B'Shish B'Tetzi Zaychulu. Right, so that takes care of really the whole story of Ma'aser Bereshis, right? Each one of these lanings that took place on Sunday through Friday was essentially taking place the two, right, the day of and the next day, right? That's what they did. Um, why do they do it this way? In terms of the laning, why were they laning from Isa Bereshis specifically? Not 100% clear why Isa Bereshis was the one that was picked to be the laning. Nevertheless, the Gemara is going to explain why they lane Isa Bereshis, but from it's not necessarily so obvious. Well, why do they have to do two? Why do they have to do two, like the Hirakia and Bereshis? Why couldn't they just do Hirakia? Well, you say, well, because you're not going to get all 6 days. No, you get all 6 days. You have 6 days of creation, lane each day separately. The answer to that is because the amount of laning of each that we have to do on a day is we have to have at least 3 psukim per aliyah. Now, the truth is, there is halacha that actually means that we have to do 10 psukim. We never want to do less than 10 psukim. It's 3 per aliyah, that's the minimum, but we never want to do less than 10 psukim. There's one exception to that rule, and that is on Purim. Purim is the only exception to that rule. We have 9 psukim. However, over here, we are going to have lanings that are going to have less than 10 psukim. This is another exception. Again, we don't have it commonly because there's no more ma'amados, but this will be another exception. In order to lane, you have to have a minimum of 3 psukim. If let's say you look at Bereshis, if you look at the parasha in Chumash, Bereshis, until they stop, V'hirakia, you'll see there's less than there's I think 5 psukim. So how is that going to be laned? So we'll do the way we do Chanukah. In other words, you'll have 2 people lane it, but you'll go over the third pasuk twice. And then the third person will lane the next portion, which will be whatever, 3 or 4 psukim. That will take care of them. And unless it had like sort of 6 psukim, in which case you could fit 2, that's how they did it. And that's why you needed to have two different parashas that they laned every day, because of the fact that you wanted to be able to get 3 eilim. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to manage it. So it says the Mishnah Parsha, if it will be a big parsha, you would be able to land it with 2. And a small one, you only do 1. And like I said, sometimes you have to do over one of the psukim twice. Now, the Mishnah says, B'shachris, b'musaf, when they used to do the laning, was by shachris and by musaf. Right? So 2 times they would do the laning. B'mincha nechnasan v'karen alpin, karen hashma. But by mincha, they would do the laning al peh. They would do the laning the way we say shema. So again, aside from the idea that you have laning by musaf, like when do we have laning by musaf? We'll put that again on the side for now. The other thing to notice here is that they're saying that by mincha they wouldn't take out a Torah to lane. They would just do it al peh, like we do shema. So I thought we'll stay here for a minute just to explain this idea that you're doing it like shema. What do you mean doing it like shema? Isn't there an issue about laning Baal Peh? So the Mishnah told us in Yuma, in the beginning of the 7th parak, that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol lane Acharei Mos, and then after he finished laning Acharei Mos, he would say, Yesim Asher Karisi, Katzav Kam. There's more than what I laned a little bit. There's a lot more here in this Torah. And then the Kohen Gadol would say, Chumash HaPikudim, he would say Mafter al Peh. He would say it by heart. So why did he do it by heart? Because, and this is what we learn out, like it's a serious thing, that you shouldn't be Garlo Sefer Torah while the tzibur is there. Obviously, if the shul only has 1 Torah and you have a laning in 2 different places, you have no choice. But so long as you have the ability to have 2 Torahs, then really it's not ideal to be Garlo Sefer Torah in public. Why? Because Terech Tzibur, or as we probably know, it is a inducement to talking, right, and to creating other issues. So by mincha, when the Kohen Gadol, when the Anshe Ma'amud would come, obviously mincha is a short tefillah, and people are not interested in having laning, so they didn't do it. They did it al peh. How can you do it al peh? Don't we say you're not supposed to do things al peh? Where does it say that? So there's 2 Gemaras. Gemara saying Gemara basically. The Gemara Gittin Samach and Tmur Yadalad. So over there in Tmur Yadalad, the Taisus says, what does it mean that the pasuk says Ki'al Pi Advarim Ma'ela? Karati Chabris Yisrael, the Devarim that are Peh are EFSHL Kaisvan, things that are meant to be Teresh Bal Peh, you're not allowed to write them down. And Devarim Shebechsav Yeter Shem Lam Peh, things that are written, not allowed to be said by heart. Says Taisvaz, things that are written not allowed to be said by heart, which is the Torah Shebechsav. For Taisvaz, how could it be there in Tzmura that we say over Shema, and people say over Tehillim, people say whatever they want to say. People say it by heart all the time. Says Taisvaz, oh, there's a difference between Torah and Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Chumash, you're not allowed to say over Baal Peh, but Nach is not such a thing. In the commentary of Rabbeinu Gershom, he says no. He says that this idea of not saying Devarim Shebechsav Baal Peh, Rabbeinu Gershom says it applies to all of Tanakh, not just Chumash. Again, put that on the side for a moment. Let's talk about Chumash itself. Forget Navi. Forget Ksuvim. What about Chumash itself? You say every day, Az Yasher. Everybody make sure to look in the Siddur by Yosha. Right? Everybody's saying everything, every word from the Siddur. No. People say Shema. They look in the Siddur. Maybe advisable, but not necessarily everybody doing it. How could it be? So Taisus' answer is essentially that if it's something that people know, then the issue about saying things by heart is not there. If it's something that people don't know, then that's where the issue comes. Taisus says that this doesn't apply to Mizmarim. Mizmarim of Tehillim, everyone knows these Mizmarim, and therefore it's not an issue. So Psukim de Zimra, and Psukim de Zimra is a situation, if you look at Shulchan Aruch and Chaim Mentes, Chaim writes the things that people are sugar with it. He doesn't say Psukim de Zimra. He says parshas of the Karbanas. I think it's a lot probably simpler to say that Psukim de Zimra, people know that by heart a lot more than they know the parshas of the Talmud or Keteres and things like that. But either way, anything you know well, you can say by heart. It happens to be, then Taisus also points out, but there's a difference between you saying it by heart for yourself versus you being Motzi Acherim b'dei Chavasam. For you to be Motzi Acherim b'dei Chavasam, then ideally you should really be saying it inside. And in fact, that is how the halacha is brought down. The Gra is machma like this, the situation where you're a chazan, well, don't say Shema by heart. Right? Even if you're on your own, you could say Shema by heart, it's no problem. But you're saying Shema as a chazan, you're saying, again, today a chaz is not being mitzi anybody with Shema. Everybody has their own siddur, everyone's saying their own Shema. But it will be a situation where you're saying something where you're being mitzi acherem b'dei chavos, and then really, ideally, you shouldn't be saying it by heart. I'll leave you with one more thing on this point, and that is what happens in relation to when. Want to open the door? Oh, it does. So what? Why? So we're saying the in relation to saying something by heart. So so what would you say over here? What would you say in this situation about mincha when they're laning the parshas breishis, the current alpian? What is that situation? They're saying the current shema. What does it mean? Are they doing it over here because shagar b'fif? Is parshas breishis shagar b'fif? Not necessarily. Why are they doing it alpeh? So it's not to metzriach and tzibur. Aren't they being mitzvah and tzibur? Aren't they being mitzvah yechem v'dei chavatan? I'll make the argument to you that that's not really a situation where the acherim are. We're not mechuyev to hear the sefer breishis by mincha. We're not mechuyev to hear by shachas. It's the thing about Anshe Maimon. They have a chiyuv. We don't have a chiyuv. The regular Hamoinam has no chiyuv. Aruch HaShulchan there in Mem Tes in Archaim makes that argument for the Kohen Gadol was allowed to lane the maftir, the haftera, aliyah, right? He did it from Chumash HaPikudim. He did it by heart and Yom Kippur. Why? He says because he's not being Moshe Chem Dei Chavasim. What's the chiyuv? We yaitz the chiyuv of laning by having acharei mais. Sure, it's part of the chiyuv to have the maftir aliyah, but it's not fundamental in the same way that you yaitz the chiyuv of laning. That's what you do by heart because you're not being Moshe Chem Dei Chavasim. There's not really chiyuv to hear that laning on Yom Kippur. I'll make the same argument to you over here, that the idea of the Anshe Maimon having to lane, that's their chiyuv, very nice, but it's not everyone's chiyuv. You're not being Meitzeh Chem Yidei Chavasan by having the laning, so therefore, if the lane I'll pay, you're not having a situation where you're being Meitzeh Chem Yidei Chavasan, they're just laning to become their chiyuv and no one else's. And that's why it wouldn't be an issue of reading it Baal Peh. Fine, so Erev Shabbos by Mincha, from the Chalasim Nikvar Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos by Mincha, they wouldn't go in because of Kfar Shabbos. Again, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it sounds like that they used to daven mechilas because they didn't want to matriach the people, even with this sort of balpeh laning of bracious, that it would take too much time. So they would daven mechilas and not be match with the people. Maybe that militates against what I just said because it would take time, I guess, to read it. Maybe there was some considered some sort of a chiv. I don't know. In any event, the mission that continues and says, "Kol yom sheyesh by Hallel ein mayim v'shachar." So if there's a day that has Hallel, they wouldn't do the ma'amadas, meaning they wouldn't do these lanings by shachars. Tesis points out over here for the top Tesis, what does it mean a yom sheyesh by Hallel doesn't have a mayim by shachars? What we mean here is a day that has Hallel but doesn't have musaf. So Tesis obviously means like a riddle. What day has Hallel doesn't have musaf? The answer has to be Chanukah. Right, because every Rosh Chodesh has Musaf, every Yontif, every Shabbos has Musaf. Only day that has Hala, no Musaf, is Chanukah. Purim doesn't have Hala, right? Kriya, Zu, Hilula. Fine. So when they had a happy day, like they were saying Hala, like on Chanukah, they wouldn't say the Ma'amades by Shachars. Karban Musaf, if they had a Karban Musaf, again, let's say it was Rosh Chodesh or some other day, so Ein bin Ila. Then they wouldn't say the Karban Musaf. When they had a Karban Musaf, they wouldn't say the Ma'amadas by Ne'ilah. Carbon Eitzim, we're going to explain what that means. They used to do these carbonas where they would bring wood to the Beis HaMikdash. Ein b'mincha divrei b'kiva. Then they wouldn't say the Ma'amadas by mincha, meaning during the week. We're not talking about on our Shabbos. Amr ben Azai. Ben Azai says, Kach hay Rabbi Yeshua Shaina. This is how Rabbi Yeshua taught it. Rabbi Yeshua, of course, is the Rabbi of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Chananya, and Ben Azai was around as well. And he says, I heard it taught Rabbi Yeshua a little differently. That what carbon musaf ein mincha. That if there was a day that there was a carbon musaf, whatever day that was ein mincha, then they wouldn't do the ma'amadas from mincha. Right? The way Rabbi Kiva said it was when they had a musaf, they wouldn't do it by ne'ilah. He says no, they wouldn't do a carbon musaf by mincha. They wouldn't do the ma'amadas by mincha. Since they did it, they would not have the ma'amadas by mincha if they had a carbon musaf. Carbon eitzim, if they had a carbon eitzim that day, ein ben ne'ilah. Then they wouldn't do these ma'amadas by ne'ilah. Again, we'll explain some of this more in the Gemara. So Rabbi Kiva went back on what he had said and started to teach it like the way Ben Azai had said it. Maybe this is a good example of what we had before on Chaf Hayam and Beis, right? The Gemara told us that when Rabbi Kiva went up to daven, he was answered, and Rabbi Elazar went up to daven, he wasn't answered. And then the was Meranin after Rabbi Elazar say, Rabbi Kiva is greater than you. And Rabbi Kiva is a student of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shua. And the Basco came out and said, no, it's not Mivnei Shezeh Gadol Mizeh, Ela Shezeh Mavra Amidosav, Zeh Eina Mavra Amidosav. Rabbi Elazar was known, whatever that means, as a sort of a tougher personality. It was not Mavra Amidosav. We gave a couple of examples, right? That the people who left the shir in Beit Tezvav, the way he dealt with the woman in Yuma. On Samach Gimel, the different stories where it sounds, like the more in Sanhedrin, right? They went to the end of his life, right? That he was on Samach Ches, that he was not willing to back off on Tzia Nun Tes, right? Tana Shalach, different things that he was not willing to back off. Whereas Rabbi Akiva is the one who teaches you that and he's much more sort of in a sense tolerant. Rabbi Elazar Shamusi. The Gemara tells us that the student of Shammai, the more Shabbos Lamed Aleph, is a tougher person, and Rabbi Akiva is is much more. Here he has a student of his Ben Azai, and Ben Azai says, "No, you're learning it wrong." Okay, he changes his mind, changes it to what Ben Azai said. Fine. Says the Mishnah, Zman Atzei Kohanim v'ha'am Tisha. The Zman of the Atzei Kohanim, the times that they would bring these carbon eitzim, was 9 times a year. And now we list the 9 times of the year. What are these times? Be'echa b'Nisan, b'nei Oirach ben Yehuda. One of the things we have to understand is why in certain months had a lot. I'm not 100% clear as to why, but during the month of Nisan, first day, was this family. Be'esrim v'tam was b'nei Dav ben Yehuda. B'chamisha b'av b'nei Parish ben Yehuda. So we have look at this. 5th day of Av. B'shiva boy b'nei Yonadav ben Rechav. There's a lot to say about Yonadav ben Rechav. This comes out as one of the haftarahs that we have now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being monning the Jewish people. Yirmiyah is monning the Jewish people and saying that Yonadav ben Rechav his family, they listened to what their Rebbeinu Shalom what their ancestor mandated out of them, and you don't listen to me. What was the Yonah ben Rechav, right? The descendants of Yisrael, and he mandated that they shouldn't be living in homes. They should only be living in tents. Whether or not that's a nonsensical or a smart kind of a command, it's irrelevant. The point is the family kept this up for generations, right? But the Jewish people don't listen to me. So we have again on the fifth day of Av, the seventh day of Av, Asara boy, Bnei Sana ben Minyam, Chamisha Asa boy, Bnei Zerusa ben Yehuda, V'imam Kahanim Levim Chomi Sheta b'Shiftai. So you have a whole bunch of days on this, right? In Av, you see the fifth, the seventh, the 10th, and the 15th day of Av, right? That will be Tu B'Av. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But on that day of the 15th day of Av, you had Bnei Zasa ben Yehuda, and along with that family was V'imoim Kahanim Levim V'Chomisha Torah B'Shifta. These are people, Mamsha, didn't know who the Shefa was. People got lost. People got confused. They didn't know. U'bnei Gun Ve'eli. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. U'bnei Kaitzik Tzios. You had a lot of people that would bring on that day, meaning it was for everyone to bring. And that, in the end of Taanit, we'll discuss that also. But for the moment now, we just are counting this as part of the 9 days. The Esrim Bar on the 20th day of Ab and Epakas Maya ben Yehuda, right? That's a very cool name. How do they have the name Maya as part of their name? It's very interesting. They always say V'Shem Yisham Yirkov. You're not supposed to be giving the name the more Yum Ches. You're not supposed to be giving the names of bad people. Right? The common name in Israel of Nimrod is a terrible thing. It's not an ideal situation. Um, so, so yeah, it's not very clear. Clearly, when the Gemara tells us about the Tana Rabbi Shmuel, another Rabbi Kiva, right? How do they have a name Yishmael? Then we have a Chazal that Yishmael repented at the end of his life. That's why I said the pasuk Vayikra Roisa Yitzchak Yishmael Banov, as opposed to by Esav, where it says Vayikra Roisa Esav Yaakov, and lists Esav first. So maybe for that one makes more sense. But to have a name like Mayav, not so clear. Mayav himself, we don't know anything about him. In other words, it could be say, what's wrong with Mayav? Mayav didn't do anything wrong. He was a descendant of women who were who meant well, right? This is one of the examples of Aver Lishma. Mayav was Ammon and Mayav. They are descendants of the Bnei Slait who thought that the world had been destroyed. And the Chaim Avinu Zar, this was their only hope. So maybe it's a foreign name, it's a foreign nation, but it's not inherently wrong. There's nothing wrong with Mayav himself, and we know, of course, that Rus comes from Mayav. The Esrim be'el, so that's another day. Is now the 20th day of El. Bnei Adin ben Yehuda be'achad b'Shvat. I'm sorry, be'achad b'Tevis. Sheboy bnei Paris Shnia. Again, another day was the first day of Teves. So Shavu b'nei Paris Shnia, they came back again for a second round. Be'achad b'Teves le'haya by Maimon on Echad b'Teves, which also happens to be Chanukah. They wouldn't have a Maimon Shahid by Halal. The Karm Musaf, the Karm Eitzim, right? It happens to be it's got three things going on that day. Right? It's got Rosh Chodesh, it's got Halal, it's got Musaf, that's Karm Eitzim. It's got a lot of things going on. They wouldn't have the Maimon on that day. We have to hurry up here. Chamisha Devarim Iru as I've seen with Shivas B'Tammuz, Chamisha B'Tishba. There were 5 things that happened on Shivas B'Tammuz. The 5 things that happened on Tishba. B'Shivas B'Tammuz on the 17th day of Tammuz, from the page of Chavav Mabez. Nishtabra Lucha is a Batal Atamid. The Luchas were destroyed. The Karmatam was Batal V'Hufka Ir, right, and the city was overturned. B'Saraf HaPoistamai Torah, and that was a time when they burned the Torah. And they put a tzelem into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. These are 5 things that happened on Shavas B'Tam, as we just said in the various different prismanim that we said on the fast. What about Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av, Nizal V'Senish Le'Konsul Aretz, right? That's the Meraglim day. V'Cherev Habayis B'Rishayno B'Shniah. So the 2 others are the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, the first and second ones. That happened on Tisha B'Av. V'Nilkada Beitar got destroyed. V'Nechar Ashayir, and then Yerushalayim got plowed over later after the rebellion. So then the Roman emperor, right, came in and literally Hadrian plowed over Yerushalayim, gave it a new name, Palestine, etc. Fine. So those are the 5 things that happened in Tisha B'Av. We're literally going to be about celebrating this now in another a couple of weeks. Now that we learned a couple of halachas about Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Shachal Tisha B'Av, right? The Sfaradim are take this Mishnah in a literal way. We don't the Shvua Shel Chalbai has specific is where the Isurim come up for them. We do it already from the Rish Chodesh. So Shabbos Shel Chal Tisha B'Av Li'Ex B'Seicha, right? Because we say Mishenichas Av Matim B'Simcha, right? This is right. Mishenichas Adam Mar B'Simcha, Mishenichas Av Matim B'Simcha. So we're ready Mamai B'Simcha. We start already doing the Isurim from the beginning of Av. But Shavuot Shel Chalbai, Shabbos Shel Chal Tisha B'Av Li'Ex B'Seicha. So then already Asim Sapra L'Chabes. That's an Isser to take haircuts, to do laundry. Again, we're already doing the haircuts earlier. Right? We're doing it ready from now. Shavas b'tamas. But doing laundry, we're still doing laundry now. So at least in the olden days, people stopped doing laundry on the ninth day. They stopped taking showers the ninth day. Today, people are much more makeup. But Shavuot Shechalbei. So again, some people are still making even then nowadays on certain things, especially in 100-degree heat. But I mean, that's a tzar da'acher and forget yourself, right? But in relation to the levels of inui that we have, so we have from Shivas B'Tamas already started something. Then we have from Rosh Chodesh. Then we have from Shavuot Shechalbei, the actual day, the week that Tish B'Av is going to be. But nevertheless, even though it was us from Sapram L'Chabes, but Chamishi on Thursday Mutar M'Nek Bar Shabbos. Remember we talked about this already before that people would do a lot of the prep on Thursday. So Erev Tisha B'Av. What about Erev Tisha B'Av itself? Lo yochel adam shnei tavshilin. A person shouldn't eat two tavshilin. Lo yochel basar v'leish yain. A person shouldn't drink wine or eat meat on Erev Tisha B'Av. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer Yishana. Right, a person should just make a change, make an obvious change that you know you're coming into Tisha B'Av. Yehuda would require that you couldn't sleep on your bed on that day. You have to turn it upside down. And the Chacham didn't agree with him. There were no 2 days that were so happy to the Jewish people like Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. And they would go out in white clothing, and borrowed clothing. They would borrow dresses from one another so that nobody would be embarrassed. Everyone needed to wash the dress. If you didn't know who was in either or not, they would go out and dance in the vineyards. And what would they say? They would say, boys, what are you looking for? Don't look for beauty. Look at the families. Right? Beauty can be false. Look for a woman who actually fears God. Go out, check out the woman on these 2 days. They would go out and be dancing in the vineyards, and we're darshaning that the daughters of Jerusalem should go out on the day that Shlomo Melech got the special blessings. One was that, and his day of his chasana, on the day of his very, very happy. What does it mean? We darshan out b'yem chasanas. What does it mean? His chasana zuma antera b'yem shem chasliba zebin beis hamikdash. Right, this is a common trope. Whenever you see that we talk about the Beis Hamikdash, we always say Meher V'Yameinu. It should be rebuilt. Meher V'Yameinu. Looking more in B'Metziach Avches, you see it over there very similarly. So we have no time, but I couldn't leave off. Maybe we'll come back to it. I don't know, but the girls going out to dance. So you know what they say about what ruined the Jewish people was mixed dancing. And so I just wanted to point out the Marshal, the Marshal in Gittin on Daf Zion. So the Marshal Simin Yudches, he goes on and on about the mixed dancing of his day, and he's going crazy about it, and saying, "Libi boy, boy, I want to destroy this mixed dancing. It's a terrible thing. All these sins, the bachrim, the girl, horrible." Right? It's like unbelievable that they had that in the 1500s. Yeah. Anyhow, why am I bringing this up? Because in the context of this going about the dancing, he says, what about our Mishnah here in Taanit? What about this? So he says, Pashut. If you look here in the Mishnah in Taanit, it doesn't say that the girls went out mixed dancing. It says, it was the girls going out to dance, but they weren't. The boys weren't a part of the dance. This is not an example of mixed dancing. You can't prove from this Mishnah about mixed dancing that it was somehow mutter. It wasn't mutter. There's no mixed dancing that was ever mutter. That's why it says bachurim v'gam besulois zakenim im na'arim, says the Marshal. Look at the difference. Zakenim im na'arim, but bachurim v'gam besulois, they had separate dances. And look at the pasuk by B'Shav. Tikak Miriam and V'Yah Face Aaron. It's a teif b'yad v'teitzena chalan nashim acharel besupim uvim chaylis. The women were doing mechalos on their own, separate from the men. Men were looking. Maybe They had good intentions. It was Yom Kippur. More to say about it perhaps another time. But this is not a raya to any heter mixed in. Stop here.